You've been mistaking retreat for recovery. How long has this been happening? You tell yourself you're being kind to yourself, that you're listening to your body. That self-care means saying no when things feel hard. And maybe sometimes that's true. But be honest. How often is that comfort you're choosing actually the thing keeping you exactly where you are? There's a pattern you've been blind to. Every time progress demands something uncomfortable from you, you've learned to dress up avoidance as wisdom. You call it boundaries when it's actually fear. You call it self-preservation when it's actually self-betrayal. And the most dangerous part? You've built an entire identity around this, convinced you're being mature, evolved, psychologically aware. But here's what's really happening. You're not protecting yourself. You're shrinking yourself, and you become so good at justifying it that you can't see the cage you've built. Marcus Aurelius Severus used to say the mind's greatest weapon against itself is its ability to make imprisonment feel like freedom. We don't just avoid discomfort, we create elaborate philosophies to explain why avoiding it is actually the enlightened choice. We're not running away. We're being strategic. We're not giving up. We're letting go. We're not scared. We're discerning. The problem isn't lack of discipline. Discipline isn't what's failing you. The problem is you've lost the ability to tell the difference between what's protecting you and what's limiting you, between what's truly caring for yourself and what's slowly eroding who you could become. And I know this cuts deep because part of you already knows it's true. You felt it. That quiet disappointment after you choose the easier path again. That voice you keep silencing that whispers you're capable of more. That slow building resentment toward yourself that you can't quite name. By the end of this, you'll know exactly why comfort has become your greatest obstacle and how to recognize the moment you trade growth for the feeling of safety. Not so you can punish yourself, but so you can finally stop sabotaging the person you're trying to become. Let me show you what this actually looks like. Dominic Kane sat across from me 3 years ago with the kind of tension in his jaw that comes from holding everything together by force. Sharp features, controlled posture, the appearance of someone who had it figured out. He'd come because despite doing everything right on paper, meditation every morning, therapy every week, boundaries with everyone, he felt like he was disappearing. He told me about this moment that kept happening. He'd set a goal, something that mattered, building his business to the next level, training for something that scared him, having the difficult conversation he'd been avoiding, and right when it was time to act, right when the path forward was clear, but uncomfortable, he'd feel it. This pull, this voice that said, "You don't have to do this right now." And the voice was so reasonable, it sounded like wisdom. It said things like, "Don't force it," and "Trust the timing," and "You need to heal first." It dressed itself up in therapy language and spiritual concepts. Brené Brown and Eckhart Tolle. It reminded him of every wound he'd ever carried, every trauma that hadn't been fully processed yet, every reason why now wasn't the right time. It was sophisticated avoidance, and it was killing him, because here's what he realized. Every time he listened to that voice, every time he chose the comfortable path and called it self-awareness, he felt relief for about an hour, maybe a day. But then something else crept in. A quiet contempt for himself. A growing gap between who he was and who he knew he could be. He'd built an entire framework for staying small and called it growth. I asked him one question. When you make these choices to avoid the hard thing, to take the comfortable path, does it make you think more of yourself or less? The pause told me everything. Because he knew. Deep down, he always knew. The comfort wasn't making him stronger. It was making him smaller. And worse, it was making him lose respect for himself. There's a Stoic principle that Seneca understood better than almost anyone. He said we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But here's the part people miss. It's not just that we imagine future suffering. It's that we avoid imagined discomfort by choosing real diminishment. We trade the temporary burn of growth for the permanent ache of knowing we chose against ourselves. Dominic started tracking it. Not his habits, not his goals, just this one thing. Every time he felt the pull toward comfort disguised as wisdom, he'd pause and ask, is this protection or is this prison? Protection serves your future self. Prison serves your present comfort. Protection says not yet, because the timing is genuinely wrong. Prison says not yet, because it feels hard. Protection is strategic retreat. Prison is habitual hiding. And here's what he found. About 80% of the time, when he was honest, it was prison. He wasn't being wise. He wasn't being kind to himself. He was just scared. And he'd become fluent in the language that made fear sound like enlightenment. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was just this. He stopped trusting the feeling of comfort as evidence he'd made the right choice. Because comfort had been lying to him. Comfort had been the drug that kept him sedated while his potential atrophied. It had whispered sweet reassurances while his dreams grew distant and his capabilities went untested. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. But you have to actually face what stands in the way. You have to stop pretending the obstacle isn't there by calling your avoidance of it something noble. So here's what you do. Tomorrow morning, you're going to feel it. That pull toward the easier choice. That voice that gives you permission to avoid what you know you should face. And instead of immediately listening to it or immediately dismissing it, you're going to ask yourself one question. If I make this choice, will I think more of myself or less? Not will I feel better, will I respect myself more? Because that's the compass that never lies. Your feelings will justify anything, but your self-respect that tells you the truth. One choice, one honest answer. That's it. You don't see it yet. But this is only the beginning.